Okay, Mike has degrees in Arts and Law from Sydney University. He's worked in strategic planning and marketing with CSR in coal, oil and gas, and with AWA in defence and electronics. For 5 years, Mike ran his own business, consulting in strategic planning, communication and organisational development. He was the managing director of Vermitech Limited, an innovative organic waste management company. Vermitech under Mike won the Yellow Pages Innovation Award, the Eureka Prize for Science and Industry, the BHP Steel Award, and highly commended Prime Minister's Environmental Award, and a runner-up for the Banksia Award. Hey, that's pretty impressive stuff. Mike is an associate of the Australian Museum and was until 2002 Director of Environmental Business Australia. As an active member of the EBA board, Mike contributed to the EBA's strategic direction and to the industry action agenda. Mike speaks regularly on environmental issues and has represented EBA on numerous occasions. He was recently made an associate of the Australian Museum and is looking to develop a project to support the museum's, and here's another acronym, FATE program. Future Australian Threatened Ecosystems. Thank you very much. Mike is currently the CEO of the Australian Compliance Institute. The Institute is one of the world's leaders in the area of compliance, ethics and governance. The 1,500 members come from every sector of the economy. The Institute works with industry, business, academics, regulators and politicians to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of compliance in both the private and public sector. Mike, it's over to you. And thank you.
It's always a privilege to have people give up their time and listen to me, because I sometimes wonder if I've got anything to say. What am I going to do today? Well, I thought I'd start with the conclusion. Most people start with a roadmap, but this conclusion is a little bit different, because most people, when they think about compliance, think about law. They think about rules, they think about regulations, and they don't think really how do you actually make it happen, what drives it. And so my conclusion is that the ethics as embodied in the company's values predetermine whether your compliance program will work or not. Now, I was at dinner in New Orleans before the flood, and at dinner there was the Deputy Chairman of the US Sentencing Commission, some people from the Department of Justice, all other really, really important people, and they'd flown me over to collect a piece of glass, because they thought we were doing some good stuff. And the Deputy Chairman of the Sentencing Commission said something that I thought was just outrageously stupid. And I took out the draft of a little book that I was writing, which is the 2-Minute Guide to Compliance, Ethics, Governance and Risk. The reason it's 2 minutes is it's for CEOs and boards, and it's 16 pages long, and I tell them, don't worry, there are 8 pages of pictures. And there's a free chapter on culture as well. And we give it away. Now, I pulled out the draft of this and I wrote something in it, because it was the exact opposite of what he said was the exact opposite of what I believe. And he said, what is this? And I explained that in Australia we kind of like to do the right thing, not to be told to do the right thing. We'd like to be educated about what the right thing is, but we'd like to have that choice. And, it's a very Australian thing to resolve from it. Anyway, he said, could he borrow it? And it had all my little reading scribbles on it. And I said, well, I need it because it's got all my reading scribbles. He said, I'll just borrow it tonight and read it. Anyway, the next day he's doing a keynote speech to a similar sized audience, about 4,000 people. And he starts talking, and I'm going, I recognise those words. Afterwards he said, America has a very prescriptive approach to what is right and what is wrong, and I will deal with that a little bit. And you talk about behaviour, and you talk about culture, and you talk about the approach, and we don't get that. And I thought, wow, I wish I could say that in public, but I won't. So for me the conclusion is also about the culture provides the systems and process independent levers to actually get effective control. Now this is kind of a novel concept. Remember, I'm a lawyer, but then I was a worm farmer, and as a lawyer I won a science prize, so I'm a kind of mixed up person, and that's kind of neat. So the roadmap, I'm going to tell you a little bit about compliance, and then I'm going to explore a bit more about the role of ethics and values. Now, we have a conundrum. There is a tremendous unrealised value from compliance. And that's because compliance is done, and you listen to the Hugh Morgans and they say too much red tape. I agree with him, but he's saying it for a different reason, you know. He's saying we have to do this stuff. He doesn't realise that there's actually a good reason to do it, rather than you have to do it. So our approach in the Institute is that compliance done well, ethics embedded in there, actually improves the systems approach and value through the behaviours that you get in your organisation. Now that is not gospel. People don't actually believe that. They still think compliance is you do it because you have to. Now there are two ways of thinking about it. There is the outside-in approach, the regulated approach, where the markets and the regulators respond to certain failures. Now there's a lovely chart, that's why you needed to sit closer to the front. And this is just a plot of various stock indices and the responses to different events. And you can see it starts high and it ends low. And you will get a copy of this, so I'm not going to read it through. But what's really neat is this cloud of distrust, where people don't trust the market. They will take their money and put it somewhere else. You also get this fantastic legislative response. I mean, you think of all the laws that have been promulgated here and in America and the UK because of these non-trust issues, as if you could actually legislate for honesty, as if you could legislate for integrity, as if you could legislate for behaviour. All you can legislate is to say you have done the right thing. Now, I'll give you a small example. Enron. You've all heard of Enron? But did you know that the California power shortage was created by Enron? Did you know that when the price was going up, it was because they were trading cheap California power out to the other states and buying it back expensively? Did you know that they were shutting down their plants for routine maintenance so they could increase the price? And when the fires came down through California, the traders said, burn baby burn, because they could shut down more sectors of the grid. Did you know that the California governor, Davis, approached George Bush to actually say, could you put a cap on this, because the state had given up its power to regulate locally? And George Bush, with people who had met with Schwarzenegger from Enron prior to this request, what did he say? No. Does that surprise me? No. All of that was legal and still is legal. Right? So the question I ask you is, I mean, you come from a different space, I'm preaching to the converted, you know it doesn't work. So what are the values of value? Now, our institution has three primary values. They are leadership, courage, and integrity. We have others, but those are the three that I really identify with. Because what we are about is building organisational integrity and trust. That's our byline. Everything we do is to help organisations with their internal integrity so they will be trusted. And we think that's kind of important. And why did we choose integrity? Because we think it is the fundamental fabric that holds everything together. And why trust? Because that's what allows us to work with other people without fear. And compliance, in our definition of compliance, not the Hugh Morgan definition of compliance, is part of this fundamental fabric of good governance. Now, this is a very simple little chart. On the one axis you have low trust, high trust. On the other axis you have high cost and low cost. And what happens, and it has been proven in study after study, when you are not trusted, the cost of doing business is great. When you start off on a new relationship, you put in a lot of time into building that relationship. That has a cost. As the relationship matures and you trust each other, it becomes easier. Bill, can you send over $15,000 worth of that stuff and I'll send you the purchase order? It happens, all right, because of trust. There are many more complex examples, but this is not a lecture on trust, unfortunately. The problem that I see is that there is a confusing reality. You have what's legal. We talked about the Enron legal. But a lot of us would say it's not acceptable. And this is a nightmare scenario for society. We have the other one in a perfect world where everything that's legal is acceptable and there's other stuff that's not illegal, but it's not specifically, you know. So you have this kind of enveloping world. What really happens in the real world is there is some stuff that is legal and acceptable. There's a whole lot of stuff that's legal and not acceptable, and we don't know how to influence this. It's very difficult. That's part of the conundrum of corporate responsibility. I don't like the word social. I just kind of think corporations should be responsible. Now, this has impacts on the regulators. Regulators in our association are equal members. That's kind of funky, you know, when you think about it, but we have a problem with anti-money laundering and terrorism, so I can call the heads of compliance from the banks into the room and the casinos and the regulators, and we sit down and say, how do we work up a good solution? And then it gets hijacked into some bad law, right? So we actually have a really good working solution that we will then put and try and get the law to allow us to do it that way. But for the regulator, he has this same conundrum. There is stuff that's illegal. There's stuff that is harmful, because the purpose of regulation is to mitigate harm. The intersection, of course, is the easy bit, right? It's harmful and it's illegal. That's really cool. But what about the Hugh Morgan argument, when he's right, that you've got the stuff that is just tactical, petty, and then you get examples like homosexuality, which were illegal. The sex trade was illegal. Didn't mean it didn't happen. And then on the other side, we've got the Henry Kays of the world, and cigarettes, and now junk food, and what James Hardie was doing was legal, separating off their liability to a Dutch company. They lied. They did a whole bunch of other things, but it was kind of legal. We don't think it's right. The state government was going to make it illegal and force a clawback. Right? Now this is the dilemma that the regulators work in. And the way society is evolving, this matrix between liability and morality is a funny word, is that you get on one side the approach which is compliance driven, where it's the courts of law and the time-bound stuff, and you know, if you didn't get it all done and it's not really specific, and you know, it's legal but wrong, you just say, well, the lawyers will say, just do it. All right? And it is moving, and I don't know whether it's generation X, Y, or the fact that we're just a more complex, more interconnected world where you can't actually hide this stuff. You know, I don't think we would have had the same responses to the tsunami if we didn't have instantaneous vision and worldwide hyperconnectivity. It is not just changing our morality, but changing our awareness of facts. All of these things, if you go to our website, you can download these reports, like the sustainability people, great reports. Now I'm going to give you a little history about the trends in compliance management. Where we are moving to is a concept that I call inside out. There is the regulator outside in, and we want to go from inside. We've talked about heart, we've talked about culture. That's where we think compliance has to come from. So a lot of people, the Hughes, have compliance as a cost. At the other end of the spectrum, there are the Mikes who say it can be valued. All right? But it's been a journey. In the dark ages, BC, that's before compliance, there was what we call legal land. It was the rule of law and lawyers, and compliance, if it existed at all, behaved like a doctor or a coroner. It was an ex post event activity where you just cleaned up when you screwed up. All right? And of course, George Bush operates in this model. He operates in the comply or die model. I put this on a T-shirt, and I handed it out at the first conference when I was at the Institute about 3 and a bit years ago. And the front of the T-shirt's a comply or die, and the back said, resistance is futile. We handed it out to every delegate, and the title of the conference was called Beyond the Law. So we've got this fundamental contradiction, which is me in a nutshell, and members were irate, incensed, and they came up to me and they said, Mike, don't you get it? We're not about that. And I said, you're in compliance, aren't you? It's a joke. And what happens is people get so passionate that they forget to see the broader world and the humour, and use humour to actually sell a message. So phase 2 of the evolution was command and control. We are in command and control now. This is where you prevent stuff. Everything goes through compliance. Now imagine a bloody great bottleneck. You've got the whole organisation trying to do all sorts of innovative stuff, and it goes to compliance for sign-off. 2 things. 1, They've done all the stuff before it gets to compliance, and compliance goes no, and they go, oh, bugger. Think of all the money I've just invested. Second one is, it gets to compliance, and there's a stack of paper, and it takes forever, and they go, those compliance turkeys, they can't do anything. It's kind of like quality was 20, 30 years ago. It's a different approach. Now, why did this happen? We had this shallow top-level understanding of what compliance was. Compliance was not strategic. Now, take corporate responsibility and substitute it for compliance, and I think you will see that there is a kind of parallel. It kind of struck me over the last 2 days. And it was separate from the business of business, and the process will make you compliant, and compliance, the function, does compliance. So you have a social responsibility department, they handle all that stuff, but for God's sake, don't let the business unit get too involved with it, because they'll screw it up and get it wrong, and they might actually get passionate and stop doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is the business of business. So it was perceived as a kind of framework, a function, a legal issue, a separate activity, and overall a cost burden. Does any of this resonate for you corporate responsibility professionals? Cool. So where are we as the Institute heading? I created a conference 2 years ago called Cold Fusion, which was, I wanted to integrate compliance, ethics, governance and risk, and after 3 days we changed the name from Cold Fusion to Confusion, because we realised we didn't understand how to do it. We knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't know how to do it. And kind of admitting that was really kind of liberating, because we knew what the right thing was, we just didn't know how to get there. But what we did realise is that to get there you have to move compliance from the policeman to become an advisor and educator. And isn't that what you're doing in corporate responsibility? You're trying to educate the corporation, you're trying to advise the corporation about how to do what needs to be done. So what we wanted to do with Cold Fusion was to integrate into the fabric of the organisation the systems, the processes, and fundamentally the behaviours. That's the bit that everybody keeps forgetting. It's a behavioural thing. And we wanted to do compliance, ethics, governance, risk, and corporate responsibility, I could add in there, so they align and support the business objectives. This is a radical rethink about what compliance is. Right? When I joined 3.5 years ago, never having had a compliance department, having run really, really big companies and started up little companies and made them big and occasionally made them little again, not intentionally, and I never had a compliance department because we just did it. We didn't call it. You know, I ran a little worm farm and it won a whole heap of prizes, and that was kind of cool. And we've changed the way the US EPA thinks, and they're letting the plants be built there. Australians kind of went, no, this is all too hard, so we grew it and exported it. But we just did it. You know, we took the Nike philosophy, and we didn't have a compliance department, although we were dealing with sewage sludge and turning it into fertiliser to grow carrots. Right? And Coles Meyer said, okay. But we crossed every regulatory, cultural and emotional boundary without actually having a compliance department. So what we're trying to do is do this so that the organisational integrity and trust is built. Now, you're confused? I looked for a 20th century philosopher who could encapsulate it for me, because I'm a man of too many words, but couldn't actually quite get it. And I think Marx said it perfectly. He said, these are my principles, and if you don't like them, I've got others. And you have to remember that when you are dealing with corporations and an individual walks in on day one, he brings with him or her a whole set of principles that may not align with the organisation. In fact, the organisation may have a set of principles on the wall and another set of principles that they do, and in different parts may do it differently. So while this is a joke, it's actually very important to realise that the organisation is schizophrenic. It is complex. So what should we be doing? We've got to figure out how to integrate it. We've got to make it part of the culture. And we have all these wonderful, fantastic silos, and of course, if I'd known what I know now about what you're doing, I would have put the fifth silo, so like the fifth horseman of the apocalypse, corporate responsibility. But when you think about corporate responsibility, it is about ethics. It is about compliance. It is about good governance. It is about good risk. It's just another part of the same dimension. And what I think you have to do is you have to get rid of the silos and embed them simply as part and parcel of the strategy, goals and fundamental physical operations of how we do what we do. But But unfortunately, the alignment in all the research that I've done is kind of like this. Risk and compliance have a bit together, ethics sits over in the corner, and the governance thing is this big thing in the middle because it's really popular. And what we really need is to realign it. So we've got governance as the umbrella, if you like, because it's a nice big word and nobody knows what it means, and it's really comfortable and feels good. We've got good governance. It kind of feels nice. So you bring your compliance in, and it's got to sit inside all this. You've got to have your risk in, but paramount, you've got to drive it from your ethical core. Right? I am Enron, I am compliant with the law. I take a highly risky strategy to screw the Californian people because it is legal. And they have fantastic systems to make sure they maximise that. Now, we showed the film, The Smartest Guys in the Room, before our conference. So I managed to get a pre-release copy, which we showed. And I managed to get the CFO of Enron Australia to introduce the film. And she's a wonderful lady. And she talked about how she was caught up in this fantastic environment that was doing so many great things, or appeared to be. And in Australia, they were actually doing some really innovative commercial things that were both legal and ethical and good for the market. Just back in head office, there was a question mark. And she said she would come to work each day excited and energised, and Heidi is a really ethical and moral lady who still thinks it was doing the right thing here. Right? Very interesting. Through all of it, she still thinks Enron Australia was great. So how do you get this realignment? How do you get board CEO buy-in? Well, you've got to start with that, but getting it is difficult. You've got to have a very clear vision of how it will actually work. You know, corporate responsibility is good. Yeah. Compliance is good. Yep. Doesn't work. So how do we get, what we're doing is we're getting the risk team and the compliance team and the audit team and all these other bits and pieces that combine to audit, and we're saying, put them on the same floor. If they've got different reporting lines, which you need for certain independence issues, cool. But put them on the same team so that they can talk, even if you can't do a formal integration. Create some visible short-term wins. Right? No magic in that. People like to be associated with success, especially boards, especially CEOs. Now, there's a fellow you might have heard of called John Fletcher, runs a small grocery store called Coles Myer. And on his first day at work, he drove in, and the butler was waiting for him where he got out of the car. And the butler opened the door and took him to the lift, and in going up in the lift he said, Mr. Fletcher, sir, not your lordship because it's not UK, but Mr. Fletcher, you know, this lift is a private lift and you'll never have to meet anybody at all if you don't want to. And then he went up to this top floor. If you've ever been to Darth Vader Towers in Melbourne, their headquarters, is a fantastic big black building, and it's huge. And the top floor had two people, John Fletcher and one of the senior managers. There was the boardroom and the Fletcher boardroom and two PAs, and that was it. He had his private gym and all the stuff, right? Trappings of power. On the Friday of that, he met with the chairman. He said, there's a problem. I need to demolish the top floor and rearrange it, and it's going to cost, and I can't remember the number, say $12 million. But don't worry, I found $12 million worth of paintings we can sell. That sent a really big signal. It was a very simple win from the heart of an individual who was the leader to set a tone. And then he took his managers away when he kind of figured out what it was. And at the end of it, when they had their vision statement and their values and what they were going to do, he made them dip their hand in paint and put it on a canvas. It's the only painting in the foyer of Coles Myer. Interesting symbology. So you need to actually create this within your organisation. And that's internal. Did you ever hear that story before? I think he's talked about it 2 or 3 times in public. Once was at our conference. So what are compliance goals? You could read corporate responsibility goals. Well, you want to protect your brand. You want to maximise stakeholder perception. You want to maximise your ratings, whether they're financial or reputation. You want to increase the effectiveness of the controls without suppressing the initiative and sustainability by making the costs manageable and valuable. What people normally do, this is the above the line, this is the Mike version of the world. The below the line, the typical below the line, is to avoid investigation and prosecution, avoid penalties, avoid going to jail, you know, if Graham Samuel gets his way. Now, there is a different response. This model was developed by a sociologist called Professor John Braithwaite. He is one of the great world gurus, and we own him. He lives in the ANU. He is just sensational. And he created a model, what he called responsive regulation. He said at the bottom there's education, and we work all the way up until you smack them and take away their right to do business. But you can actually think of this as an internal model, the way you would work within your own organisation. Now, what happens is you get the people at the bottom who are just going to do it. You get the people in the middle who are opportunists and will kind of get away with it if they can, but they're not set against it. And you get the crooks at the top. And the problem for you in trying to educate about corporate responsibility or compliance is how do you move your organisation down the pyramid? Most people want to get up to the top. You actually want to just get everybody complying at the bottom. And there are a whole series of complex realities about that. Now, the ACCC model is kind of interesting. They simplified it. And traditionally, the ACCC has been seen as a really aggressive, kick you in the head or any other part of the body they could get to show the world that they were really effective regulator. Graham Samuel has a different view, except for cartels, which he is passionately against. He wants to push it so that there is an internal domain, this inside out. Because at the top of the pyramid, it's external, outside in. And there is a technique, and I won't go into the legalities of it, but it's an enforceable undertaking. And the focus of the undertaking up until 6 weeks ago was this is a penalty. Now the ACCC is saying this is just a way of helping you do the right thing internally. It's an interesting twist of language, but it's actually requiring a cultural shift across the whole of the ACCC. So we've just done a roadshow with them in 8 cities in 10 days. It was fun. So what does this mean? You talk about making corporate responsibility strategic. I've heard it a couple of times in some of the sessions. And most organisations have a strategic model where you create your strategy, you have your goals and objectives, you have your operations, then you set up some business rules to make it happen, you put in some critical controls, and you then monitor and report, and it goes around this wonderful virtuous circle, which is not always virtuous. What's interesting is when I talk to CEOs and boards, they all go, nod, yeah, it's exactly what we do, we might shift some of the boxes around. And I say to them, and this is the bit that makes them just sit up, I said, you realise, of course, your strategy requires you to have a whole series of internal compliance requirements. And they go, no. I said, well, what are the rules that allow you to make sure your strategy happens? Don't you put in place a whole system of monitoring and auditing and control? And after we've talked about 20 minutes and the Wheaties have got cold, because we normally do it over breakfast, it's the only time they will sort of give me, that and cups of coffee. I've drunk so much coffee trying to do this job. That model is a really interesting model because at this point there are no external compliance drivers. And I talked to them about the hyper-connected world, and imagine if every stakeholder knew everything you did, how would your compliance department behave? Who would run it? So if you screwed customer A, every customer and potential customer knew. If you dudded supplier B, every potential supplier would do it. How would the company behave? What would the compliance department look like? And the one goes, the marketing director would own compliance. And the other goes, no, my purchasing director would own compliance. And it's only through the opaqueness of our complex society that we've found that we actually have to have laws and rules. Does this make sense? Am I boring you? Okay, I can keep going. Now, of course, you introduce the concept, that's inside-out regulation, isn't it? Self-regulation. Companies don't do it very well. So we impose all this external stuff. Now, if we did more of the inside-out stuff and less of the, we would need less of the outside. And what Simon was saying yesterday is some people are saying they've regulated so much there's no choice available to make an ethical decision. I don't quite agree with him, but it'd be nice if that were true, that people actually felt they were doing the right thing because they had to and wanted to. So effective compliance, effective corporate responsibility is the way you'd want your organisation to run in the absence of legal drivers. It's the way you would meet effective stakeholder expectations, and I've heard this term a couple of times. It'd be part of the fundamental core of who people are and the holistic whole that then becomes the organisation. It's not focused in tiny little bits of the company, in tiny little departments. It's about this whole concept of quality operational excellence. And remember, that's what we thought it was, that it was a function, a process. And unfortunately, some of the thinking that I'm hearing is that corporate responsibility is still seen very much in that right-hand box. So is that right? I mean, is that your experience? It's kind of functional and, you know, it's really peripheral to the core of doing what you do. Now, for us, it's a little bit problematic because compliance failure is a fact of life. And we actually got a regulator, ASIC, small corporate regulator, to stand up the other day because we were doing some research and they said they wanted to speak at the workshop we were doing. And I said, why? And they said, well, because you're really treading on our turf. And we went, no, we're reshaping your turf. What do you want to say? And they said, breaches happen. Well, I had to literally... sorry, what did you say? Breaches happen. Because ASIC said breaches are not allowed to happen up until that point. So they realised that, in fact, with good compliance, you can reduce it and you can mitigate it, but you can't prevent it. Now, there are many different things what constitute compliance failures: breaches of procedures, regulations, codes of conduct, where you compromise your stakeholder relationships, whether they are customers or staff or shareholders. I have a problem with having to take into account every stakeholder. I kind of use the metaphor of the vampire and I at midnight, and I'm holding the wooden stake, my ring of garlic, and he says, yeah, you've got the steak, but I want it. I have an interest in the steak. And I say, yeah, you do, but it's absolutely counter-opposed to mine, and I know what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to put it into your heart and put you out of my misery. I don't think every stakeholder who has an interest in what you're doing necessarily should be the driver for what you do. It's a very interesting ethical domain, values domain, how you choose what you are. So you have to be very careful in setting up your values right up front to be clear of what rights you're going to give to different people, and you give them. Rio is a very interesting example because their research into where the various intersections of different stakeholders occurred formed the platform for their entire global approach to compliance and risk and governance. And it's a very, very interesting study if you can get hold of it. And then, of course, there's the stuff that I'm passionate about, the invisible bit. You know, the boss said we should do this, but the guy's a turkey. You know, I know the code says we should do this, but really what I'm going to do is, you know, there's the boss, I don't believe him. I know he said this, but look at what he actually does. These are the invisible systemic things that corrupt, and I use the word intentionally, as in corrupt and mortify the flesh of the organisation. So the failure factors, and think of them, I looked at this again in terms of corporate responsibility. Failure of top-level commitment and follow-through. Don't really care about it because it's not part of the values. Silo structures and knee-jerk responses to specific events where you'll roll out the greenwash, like Hardy. You know, when I read Meredith's statement in the paper, we were doing this voluntarily my backside. You know, they were kicking and screaming to a marriage that was imposed on them, that if they could wriggle out of it without going out of business, they would wriggle out of it. It's very interesting. A friend of mine used to be the head of 60 Minutes and Four Corners. He does PR. He turned them down as a PR client. I mean, he would have made millions out of it. He said, no, screws with my values. Another friend of mine who did some PR for me once, he took it on, and 3 months in, the hate mail he was getting from all us people who say, what are you doing, Bruce? Get with the program, mate. And he resigned. You know, it's very interesting. People don't always get it. Part of the problem with failure is the focus on the process, not the real outcome. Compliance is about outcomes. Corporate responsibility is about outcomes. And then, of course, they don't give you enough resources to actually identify and manage it. And they don't allocate who is responsible for doing it. So the lack of apparent value, these barriers, the compliance negative perception really does exist. The negative perception for the value of corporate responsibility really does exist. It's a cost in cash, in labour, in decision time, slows everything down. I mean, isn't that part and parcel of your language? No? Yes? Somebody? Anybody nod? Disagree? Are we all asleep? Is there anybody in the room? Could you please wave your cardboard cutout arms? Show me you are alive. Thank you. In compliance it's a little different because they talk about it being a dampener on the natural aggressive capitalist tendencies. Now, how many of you have heard of a small bank called Macquarie Bank? Right. They have a model that's called tight loose. There are some rules, very, very prescriptive, tight rules about risk and governance and compliance and ethics. You go outside those rules, you will be fired. Then there's a kind of fuzzy barrier zone, and if you're in there, you just lose your bonus. Right? And your bonus could be $1 million. Right? So your whole bonus is contingent on being inside the inner circle, not the outer circle. The outer circle is where you get asked to please don't come back on Monday. In fact, all your stuff's in a box. We've changed your logins, and please forget you ever worked here because we've forgotten you're here and we're sorry you were here to begin with. Right? Inside Macquarie Bank, it is an aggressive, dog-eat-dog, go-for-it organisation. They have this strange dichotomy. But if you talk to Alan Moss, he's very proud of that dichotomy because it allows them to be aggressive inside a cultural value. Right? You have to try and work out what the cultural value of the organisation is if you're trying to make your compliance program, or in your case, the corporate responsibility program, actually take root and grow. The problem with fusion in our model is when you've got a risk manager and a compliance manager, and now they're the risk and compliance manager, somebody goes. Right? Companies like that, but people who are in position fight it tooth and nail, and will come up with good and bad reasons why it should never happen. When you're trying to do this is have budgeting and staffing pacts, who's going to have a seat at the table? Now the compliance and risk god suddenly is at the board table or at the CEO executive table, and the others who are there who actually make money and do things don't like this. There's a lot of resistance to managers taking on the responsibility because they're too busy, or it's just plain too risky, it's too hard. Why should they take on the responsibility? I'll give you a couple of illustrations. We've all heard of the National Australia Bank. Now, I persuaded the head of compliance for the National Australia Bank to speak at our conference, and I gave her a 2-hour slot between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock. We had multiple streams. And I said to her, your topic is from ashes to phoenix. Where are we on the journey? And all the consultants, the big consulting houses and the lawyers said to Frank, don't let her do this. And to Ahmed, Frank's the kind of god boss, and then Ahmed is the deputy god boss. He's head of Australia, of the NAB. And so the consultants were worried about the negative exposure if they actually told the story in the open, in a forum that was recorded, but no press. And the response from everyone in the audience was, A, it's the best presentation they've ever been to, B, the lessons were extraordinary, and C, it gave them some faith that the NAB was actually trying to do the real thing and not greenwash it. I mean, the structural process, cultural shifts that they are going through are enormous. You all know about the Buddha sticks and the guys who tried to make money and were empowered to make money, were permitted to not comply with the systems. It was a cultural deficit. Enron was a cultural deficit. So when you do the diagnosis and you look at the cultures and the values, they can absolutely nullify the systems and the process. NAB had great systems and process, but it took a young girl to go in and say, excuse me, but, and that's what whistleblowers are. The emperor has no clothes. Someone who goes either through ignorance or integrity, and sometimes it's ignorance, actually says, excuse me, but this doesn't seem right. Professional sport, who could have missed the Bulldogs? Now, whether they're guilty or not is a very interesting issue, but the way it was handled, both by the police and by the Bulldogs, is just pathetic. The ARU, Australian Rugby Union, when they had that little drink thing in South Africa, you know, they actually said, okay, we're going to make the corporate values of the rugby union a requirement for you to actually be on the team, even if you're a great footballer. But the one I loved, which was just last month, the AFL, there was a quote, they're going to ban payments of hush money for sexual indiscretion. I'm going, wait a minute, what's wrong with that statement? And then we've heard Mr. Truly, Truly Sorry. I was going to play the video, but I didn't trust myself with the technology, of him going, I'm truly, truly sorry. I have another video of Mr. Abbott going, I'm truly, truly sorry. I have another video of Mr. Abbott saying it's only a technical breach. And you go, I'm truly, truly confused about the value of my leadership, where I can be truly, truly sorry, and that's absolution. And we do have a society, unfortunately, that gives absolution to those, and I worry about it a little bit. Now, what have Enron and Bhutan got in common? You know where Bhutan is? Tiny little country just sort of up there near the Himalayas. Enron had this fabulous culture which was outcome driven. It was about absolute power and infallibility. It was about non-questioning. It was about money. If you missed that, it was about making a lot of money. Growth and profit above all else. Now, do you know what the KPI for Bhutan is? It's GNH, Gross National Happiness. Now, imagine Peter Costello getting up there and saying, Australia is now a happier place based on all these indices of well-being, and being proud of it. I think he would kind of like to, somewhere where he's buried it, you know, his brother's kind of in that space. But that's not what cuts it as being a treasurer. And so we have a conflict between the measures, and people say, you know, what gets measured get done. And I go, yep, but sometimes there's a whole bunch of other stuff that gets done that you should be looking at, but you can't measure. But having a measure that is, from the King of Bhutan, gross national happiness, and every project, every initiative is measured of, will it improve gross national happiness? If it doesn't, we don't care how much money it makes. End of story. It's really cool.
We're just into the last 15 minutes.
15 minutes, I was going to say, wow. Other examples?
15 minutes about questions. So
am I moving into question time? Okay, well, I'm going to, you can read all the stuff, factors that support, but I like compliance culture. Tom Peters says it's the culture's about the way we get things done around here. We added when no one's watching, and the wrong culture evolves when no one's listening. So we have as I said, we wrote this little 2-minute guide. You can download it for free off our website. Please do. It's a PDF. We printed 7,000 copies and sent it to CEOs and boards. We got sponsored so we could do it for nothing. We've had 127,000 downloads of the PDF from the statistics that we've been given. So we actually want to change what we're doing, or change, and the challenge for leaders to understand it. But what I'm going to go to is, unfortunately this is a really important slide, but I'm not going to get time to do it. It's how it flows down from the governing body. And you get this flow of trust down through delegations. Unfortunately, people don't respect, as boards, that they need to be trusted on the way back up. And they put in place all these wonderful formal reporting up systems, but what they forget, the real value reporting is this series of informal that happens at the coffee and the water, and the right to actually formalise the informal as part of how you communicate across the organisation. Now, when you get these zones of open communication, it's like with the media, you actually get a transparency internally. This is forgetting about external transparency. And compliance sits outside. It doesn't get in the way. It advises and consults. And it's kind of like corporate responsibility. It should be advising and consulting all the way through the organisation so it can be done. Now, I add this thing about whistleblowers, because that's when the person that you should be talking with directly just doesn't get it, and you need to go round them. And that's a really difficult culturally in Australia, because whistleblowers always get the hard end. They are not respected. There are huge costs of being a whistleblower. Now, this is my fabulously interactive new slide, which I invented the other day. It's something I've been thinking about. I'm a science lawyer freak, and so I like physics. And what happens is people think that what you do with compliance is you build systems and processes and you put a lot of effort in. And what you get is a compliance result. But unfortunately what they forget about is this dinky little pivot point here which actually allows it to happen, and that's your cultural domain. Now, of course, when you move a positive culture, what happens is for the same amount of system and process effort, read cost, you will get a better compliance result. I believe corporate responsibility built into the culture will move that cultural pivot point. So I see corporate responsibility as a fundamental part of the corporate compliance culture or the corporate ethical culture, whatever labels you want to put on it. So I think this concept of a strong culture building a robust organisation is just fundamental, but people don't get it. But there is a CFO who does get it. Most CFOs just talk about the money. Phil Cronican from Westpac said this, and he said that the factors that drive an environment of regulatory compliance and sound corporate governance are the same that will support sustainable business. And what he also said, which I really love, the most important factors are those which legislative prescriptions cannot possibly ever address. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, to go to questions, I'll just kick it off. It's probably a little naive. Maybe if we look at compliance benignly, could we possibly see external compliance as a benchmarking or a guideline for those companies who don't know where to go or they're learning where to go?
Yeah, the externally driven compliance, as in the legally driven or regulatory driven compliance, sets the minimum platform, absolutely. But to use it as a benchmark of what you should be doing, I think is inappropriate. And the complexity, particularly for medium and small enterprises, it's very difficult to even know what the laws are. I mean, there's just thousands of them out there. So it's very hard for them to benchmark. We are actually looking at building a benchmarking tool which will look not so much at what the law says, but what the risks are for organisations in terms of breaching compliance, whether it's written down law compliance or written down you should be doing this compliance. And that will be a free-to-air tool. So you come in as a panel beater and it'll say, look, what we really think you should be looking at is your risk and your OH&S, environmental risk and OH&S risk. And there are a couple of little marketing things and actually not padding the bill. So we're going to ask you questions down that. So I think it's too complex to just rely on the law as a benchmark. Frighten everybody.
No. I always interpret that when I'm talking about it. If no one has any questions, it means you're just so explicit and you spoke it so well. But there is one.
Very well presented argument. It's interesting the State Environment Department is increasingly getting into partnerships with industry, particularly leading industry and CSR, to help them with compliance as well as other benefits they can gain. I was wondering if you could make a comment on that sort of partnership, as well as how do we get some of the more laggard type companies to improve their performance without using a big stick?
We work with regulators and industry. So we've been working on an issue of breach reporting, which we've done some research, and on the 14th of December we will have 5 of the key regulators sitting in a room with us to talk about how we change the approach to get a better protection of the public, a lower cost burden and a better outcome. When the EPAs asked me how do we do this enforceable undertaking stuff, we gave them all the knowledge that we had, and we then said, but we'll only do it if all the EPAs get together, so we have one set of rules nationally, because this multiplicity is a pain. So they all came to Sydney and spent 3 days arguing that one issue. It takes a huge amount of trust to get organisations to sit down and say with their regulator, I screwed up or I don't know what I'm doing. Until we actually educate the regulator on the behavioural domain, that pyramid that I put up, and actually get this interaction, and that's one of the great things that I think we do, is facilitate that communication. It's really, really difficult. So I think it's a great idea to actually have partnerships in providing solutions. How do you get the laggards? You beat them over the head with a wooden stick with a couple of nails in it when they screw up. If they will not be seduced into compliance, you beat them into compliance. There's no choice.
Listening to your presentation, it made me think of something that I read about last week, which was, I think it's the survey results of a whole range of company directors and boards, and
The Tractor-Largan study on the response to ethics, yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And the key finding of that seems to me to be that ethics is not discussed at board level in a lot of institutions and a lot of companies. Clearly, the boards are making decisions that have ethical dimensions, how do we get an articulation of the direction of the decisions that boards are making?
We put the book, the 2-minute guide, together to send to boards. Well, we sent it to the chairs of the boards and to the CEO of the top 1,000 companies, roughly. And it was interesting the lack of response we got back directly from them. We got a lot of response back from people who said, my CEO wants to know how we do this stuff. So we had 200 or 300 of those. I didn't get any responses from the chairs. And the argument goes something, I have a lot of coffee with directors. It's the way that they can relate, because it's non-threatening, and I sometimes wear a tie to make them feel comfortable. And because I came from that space. So I'm kind of maybe weird. You know, I used to be there and I'm over there, and maybe it's like Greg Bourne, who's gone across the world while, you know, he was BP. So he can actually talk with them. I think what most boards believe is that they are such good people of upstanding virtue. That's why they were selected to the board, so they bring their ethical toolkit with them. What they don't understand is that in decision making there are a whole raft of complex competing values, stakeholders, and I don't believe when they actually do their decision making they bring that into play. So there's a lack of awareness. My own board, which is made up of highly committed ethical compliance professionals and risk professionals, we had a very difficult decision to do with whether we would endorse a project we'd been working with ASIC and 10 other associations, and I argued that it was a really, really mealy-mouthed approach that was finally concluded, and they were saying, but we don't want to break ranks, and you know, all the kind of usual stuff you've heard around the board table. And I said, what are our 3 core values? Leadership, courage and integrity, and how do those inform our decision-making process? And after sucking in their breath for a few microseconds, they went, you're right, and then they went back to our values. I think the only way to get boards to address the value chain, or the values chain, is to actually get them to understand what their own corporate values are, not their personal values. Because when you bring your personal values to a corporate decision, it's not always appropriate.
Do you have the last question?
Yep. You can't tell them, you can seduce them. You can open the window and let them look out and say they like the view. You can't say you must look out. So. Yeah. The problem with not-for-profits generically, and I'm sure everyone's different, is that people who are in the not-for-profit sector clothe themselves in this virtue cloak, and therefore every decision they make they kind of see as good. And then they go back to the corporate pressure, and they might refer to it, but they've really brought their personal bag with them to the not-for-profit. Whether individuals get infected with a different perspective, that would be whether they were open to it in the first place. I think the more profound changes that I've seen, and there isn't enough research to make it a generalised statement, is that when people work on a project for an extended period of time where their values are challenged, and then you actually get some growth in the individual. But just simply being on a board because of the very nature of the way boards work, I don't think so. That's a gut reaction.
and thinking it through and then making it come to the company?
The way we work is, for example, I hold a lunch for the heads of compliance for the top 8 banks. And that led to a benchmarking study that led to some issues that will lead to a one-day workshop, which will lead to this stuff filtering back up through. The fact that Westpac gives us our accommodation and quid pro quo, we talk to some of their senior people, you know. So I get to do my job by them giving me free accommodations, kind of neat. It's slow. I mean, if you talk to Ahmed and you talk to Frank and you talk to David at Westpac, if you go to some of the opposite ends of the spectrum, if you go to the Sydney Waters, you know, it depends on their personal ego and their culture, whether they will adapt any of this. It also depends on the political masters, because we deal equally with government bureaucracies as with corporate bureaucracies. Also, this is new theory and this is new practice. You know, when I started 3 years ago, it was black letter law was maybe something we should stop talking about. So we went, the first conference was beyond the law. Second one was culture is critical, then cold fusion. And that was only in 2004, right? So 2005 was to do a sustainability embedding this stuff. So I think the lag from new idea to absorption to the common day, you've got to allow 3 to 5 years, I would think. A lot of it. Yeah, I'm sorry. A lot of it comes out of small groups of really bright people who just like to toss around why it's not working. But some of the thinking comes out of my research and work that I did in chaos theory and systems theory, in running big and small companies, in totally reshaping other companies. It comes from a management perspective, not a compliance perspective. I happen to be a lawyer. I apologise for that. I became a worm farmer, and people forgave me. But seriously, it's the history of management is one of an idea taking root over time. So if you look at Drucker's work, it took a long time for him to be deified and accepted. I think this is the new wave. Certainly, we've had 150,000 hits on the new website in 3 weeks. Somebody's taking the stuff somewhere.